Okay, as a performance artist, what's important is not just having ideas. Ideas are easy, but to actualize these ideas, to physically perform them and to personally experience them. So now bodies are becoming increasingly augmented and machines are becoming increasingly autonomous. So alternative intelligences are generated. Artificial cognition begins to contaminate human comprehension. So the digital is not only the realm of the virtual, it's not only the realm of the computational. This now facilitates alternative anatomical architectures. So to be in excess, for the body to be in excess of its biology, it means this is that it oscillates between the biological, the machinic, and the virtual, both in proximal and remote spaces. And aliveness and affect is not only generated in the biological anymore. To be in excess is to be an extended and affective operational system. So between 1973 and 1975, I made 3 films of the inside of my body. This was not for any medical reason, but rather an artistic action, a total of 3 meters of internal space. And for the first time, as a younger artist, I would experience the body not simply a surface of skin, but rather an internal architecture of spaces, of tissues, of bones, of muscles, and of circulatory systems. And then 20 years after that, the 5th Australian Sculpture Triennale in Australia, the theme of the Triennale was site-specific works. But instead of a sculpture for a public space, I decided to design a sculpture for an internal body space. So here the sculpture is an artwork for an organ of the body. So the body here is no longer merely a site for the psyche or for social inscription. It becomes a host for a sculpture. The body becomes a host for an artwork inside the organ of the body. And inside the stomach, the sculpture opens and closes, extends and retracts, has a flashing light and a beeping sound. So a simple machine choreography inside the stomach. So we can say there's no longer a meaningful distinction between internal and external spaces of the body, and increasingly a little distinction between the living and the dead. In fact, Friedrich Nietzsche reminds us that the living are only a species of the dead. Initially, the body's kind of psychological and physical parameters were explored in these series of suspension performances. There were about 27 performances suspending the body in different locations, in different positions. Here, the body is counterbalanced by a ring of rocks. In fact, the body was gently swaying, setting up random oscillations in the rocks. This performance was terminated when the telephone rang in the gallery. Hoisted up and lowered down a lift well in Melbourne, and suspended on an outcrop of rocks about 300 metres from shore. There were a group of Japanese fishermen. They were fishing before we arrived. They kept fishing during the performance, and they were still fishing when we left. And one of the few public performances, here the body was suspended 60 metres above the Royal Theatre in Copenhagen. After 30 metres, all you could hear was the whooshing of the wind, the whirring of the crane motors, and the creaking of the skin. One of the few suspensions in Australia in a warehouse space with a gantry crane. So here the body could control its position and motion through the warehouse. The body could propel itself forwards, sideways, left and right, and no one was really told what was going to happen, but people started to follow. There was a barking dog and a crying child in the audience, which added a certain ambience to the performance. And also I discovered unexpectedly, when I stopped suddenly, the body would swing. So an additional choreography that occurred. So this performance began when the body was hoisted off the ground, and the performance finally ended when the feet touched down. It was only for about 20 minutes, and this performance, I think, was in 1988 or something like this. So in retrospect, the piercing of the skin with the suspensions, with steel hooks, and the internal endoscopic probing of the body generates a desire not only for attachments, but also to augment the body. And also include implants, an urge to internalise the technology. In other words, to hack the body, to hack the human, to go beyond the cosmetic, beyond simply inserting objects into the body, but have something operational inside an organ, an artwork inside an organ of the body. The third hand was the first augmentation, which was developed in 1980 when I was living in Japan. It has a wrist rotation, a pinch release, a grasp release, a rudimentary tactile feedback system for a sense of touch, actuated by by the electrodes on the abdominal and leg muscles, allowing independent movement of the three hands. This was sophisticated enough at the time to get invitations from the Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena and the Johnson Space Center in Houston to demonstrate the hand to the extravehicular activity group. Initially, this was simply a visual attachment, an aesthetic attachment for performance. But I did learn to do some more useful looking things. Here, writing one word, each hand writing a separate letter at the same time. I had to keep my two eyes on what my three hands were doing. I only learned to write two words, evolution and decadence, because these were both 9-letter words. And also because this performance was done on a sheet of glass between the artist and the audience, I had to learn to write it back to front, remembering every third letter that I was writing because of the spacing of the three hands. A performance with the third hand, but also amplifying brain waves, heartbeat, blood flow, muscle signals, so as well as being immersed visually in the performance, people in the gallery were immersed acoustically. So these are the sounds that you'll hear: brain waves, heartbeat, blood flow, muscle signals. Can we have the sound really loud? So this performance began when the body was switched on, and the performance ended when the body was switched off. The extended arm is an 11 degree of freedom arm, but something that I wear. It extends my right arm to primate proportions, so it's a very long arm. But in this performance, whilst my right arm is extended, my left arm is performing involuntarily via a muscle stimulation system. So the performance you'll see is a 4-hour continuous performance of a split body. Right side, an extended arm that was controllable. On the left side, my body is performing involuntarily. So the performance was live streamed. This was in 2000. So, by the way, I'm discussing these projects not necessarily chronologically ordered, but more sort of logically ordered. So the 3D model mimicked the physical movements of the manipulator. And so online, you would see the video streaming of the performance, and also you would see the 3D model mimicking the motions. So the body was performing with its video projection and with the large shadow that increased its presence in the gallery. This was in Aix-en-Provence, by the way. So this is the muscle stimulation control box, 6 degrees of freedom, 15 to 50 volts of muscle stimulation, and this indicates which muscles could be programmed. One leg was free to balance, but the other leg and the 2 arms could be pre-programmed to perform. And here, using a simple 3D model of a body, a touchscreen interface. So by touching the muscles on the computer model would simulate your choreography. And then a second later, in Luxembourg, where my body moved involuntarily. So people could remotely access and remotely actuate my body in another place. People in the Pompidou Centre in Paris, the Media Lab in Helsinki, the Doors of Perception conference in Amsterdam, for example, were over a period of 2 days, 6 hours continuously every day, my body could be accessed and actuated. And we should remember now that we navigate from deep time to physical nanoscales to virtual non-places. The body inhabits abstract realms of the highly hypothetical and of streaming subjectivity. The body becomes a kind of hyperhuman that becomes less than the sum of its hyperlinks and more than the sum of its attachments and implants. Ping body, this was another remote actuation of the body, but instead of people in other places, we used the ping protocol at the time, 1996, and pinged 30 global locations, and the reverberating ping signals that came back to the host computer were mapped to the body's muscles. This is happening in milliseconds, and the body moves as a kind of crude barometer of internet activity. So depending on the internet activity, depended on how active the body was involuntarily performing. And Parasite, I think 1997, this in particular, there was a performance at Ars Electronica later, but one of the original performances was in NTT ICC in Tokyo. And here we customized the search engine to scan the net, select anatomical images from the web, project them to my head-up display. The images that I see are the images that move my body. The images are analysed for their complexity, and then this information is mapped to my body's muscles. So in this performance, the body is also the video switcher and video mixer. The body has sensors on its arms, leg and head, and so as it performs involuntarily, it's switching the different cameras, and it's producing this combination of images. In fact, the sounds that you're hearing are a combination of sounds that were also harvested from the net, small segments of sound, mixed with the sounds of the third-hand motors, and some sensors generating some signals from the video switching. I'm jumping forward to a project that's happening now in Paris at the robotics lab at the Sorbonne. This is called the hypertrophic ambidextrous hand and arm, abbreviated HA-HA. So this has 10 degrees of freedom, elbow flexion, shoulder flexion, continuous wrist rotation, and the fingers are ambidextrous. So the fingers can bend one way, the thumb rotates, you have a right hand, but the fingers can bend completely the other way, the thumb can rotate backwards, so you have a left hand and a right hand all in the one design. We also have a camera in the wrist area, so there is an eye in arm that can produce close-up images of the body when it's performing. So what I'm going to show is the test that we did. It's not an actual performance. The performance will happen in Paris next year. So that's why you'll see some close-ups of the body. So this is the arm. It's mostly 3D printed with only the gearing on the shoulder and the elbow needing to be brass. So there will be another camera on my right arm producing close-ups of the hand mechanism, arm mechanism. So again, the body will be the live video switcher and video mixer in this performance. And this is now being completed in Paris. So going back in time now to the exoskeleton robot, which will become part of the permanent collection here at ZKM. And exoskeleton was developed in 1997 when I was artist in residence in Hamburg City, and was fortunate enough to meet a group of artists, F18, Stefan Dorpner, Lars Vorpal are here installing the robot. We're looking to also do some minor repairs and renovations. Just to indicate that the artist's exoskeleton and controller selects the walking movements of the machine. So the robot can walk forwards and backwards with a ripple gait, sideways with a tripod gait. The robot can squat, it can stand, it can stomp, and it can turn on the spot. These are the basic functions, and this performance is simply taking the robot for a walk. No pyrotechnics, no nothing. You go for a walk with the robot, but of course it's also a sound machine as well. So the artist is looking in the direction that he's going, listening to the sounds that the legs and the system is producing, and composing the sounds by choreographing the movements of the machine. Exoskeleton is 3 meters in diameter. This project is titled Muscle Machine. It's 5 meters in diameter. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 meters in diameter. A very large walking machine actuated by pneumatic rubber muscles. Rubber muscles that are produced by a company called Festo, but if you inflate them with air, they expand in girth, contract in length. So they're very powerful actuators, but very anatomical in their feel. And the theory, and this was how basically the walking motion was generated, by encoders on the hip joint, leg joint. So by lifting one leg up, it lifts 3 robot legs and swings them forward. So the robot is always stable on 3 legs, but you alternate walking by lifting your... So it's just translating a human bipedal gait into a 6-legged insect-like locomotion. In fact, we needed additional support for the robot to walk because of the danger of the thing collapsing. But nothing that I imagine turns out the way that I expect. In fact, I can say that I've made a career out of being a failure. Nothing turns out as you wish, either through budgetary constraints, expertise available, the duration of time you have on your project, and of course, this is not produced by a large company, but by smaller groups of people. So all of these projects and performances are about experimenting with alternative anatomical architectures. In other words, what does it mean to perform with an extra arm, or to perform with 6 legs, or to have an ear on your arm, for example? The walking head will also be in the collection here. It's also upstairs now being repaired. So the rotating ultrasound sensor would detect if someone approaches the robot. The robot then stands, selects from its library of possible movements and performs a simple choreography, then sits down, goes to sleep and waits for the next person to come along. It's a very noisy robot. I like noise. Basically the pneumatic sounds and the compressed air, the generator which is close by, kicking in every now and again. But it's an autonomous, interactive robot that doesn't require the artist. And the original intention was to sort of engineer an actual virtual system where the mechanical movements of the legs would animate the facial behaviour of the head. This was never realised. So in this age of body hacking, gene mapping, prosthetic augmentation, organ swapping, face transplants, synthetic skin, what it means to be a body, what it means to be human, and what generates aliveness and agency becomes problematized. In the spaces of proliferating prosthetic bodies, partial life, and artificial life, the biological body has now become profoundly obsolete. A kind of more radical bodily structure. This was a project titled Blender, done with another artist, Nina Sellers, where both artists underwent liposuction to extract 4.6 litres of their biomaterial. This was inserted in an installation titled Blender. It's the inverse of the stomach sculpture. Instead of a machine choreography inside the human body, here a machine installation becomes the host for a liquid body of biomaterial from two artists' body. So the machine installation is a kind of biomechanical body. The scale is kind of human size. There are proximity sensors around the chassis of the machine, so they detect if someone comes close to the installation. If someone comes close enough, it'll switch on the blender blades and begin mixing the biomaterial. We began with very chunky biomaterial, but now it's very finely mixed. So if it's possible, and it's very plausible, if we can engineer an artificial womb and bring to bear a healthy child, then life would not begin with a biological birth. And if we can replace malfunctioning parts of the body with stem cell grown organs, 3D bioprinted and artificial parts, then we need not die a biological death. So if this happens, how do we define human existence that doesn't begin with birth and doesn't necessarily end in death? Having said that, we no longer die biological deaths. We die when our life support systems are switched off, unless we're involved in some catastrophic, accident. And interestingly, in 2017, Tina Gibson, an American woman, successfully gave birth to her daughter, conceived from a 25-year-old frozen embryo. Interestingly, Tina Gibson was also 25 years old. So her embryo was the same age as the mother who gave birth to it. And what's interesting here, I think, is that, and it's plausible that we can sustain healthy embryos for more than 50 years. And when this becomes possible, we will increasingly disconnect reproductive processes from individual existences. So you might be born on the deathbed of your twin brother. You might be born generations after your mother has passed away. I think this is a really interesting kind of situation where we're disconnecting totally reproduction from individual existence.
1 year to ensure that he met the true criteria to be the right patient for this transplant. And sure enough, he did meet this criteria. At that time, we described a procedure which would essentially restore everything which was not functioning and appearing normal on his face, which included portions of the scalp through the forehead, the upper lower eyelids, the nose, upper lower lips, soft tissues of the chin, down to the level of the neck, and the underlying structures, which included the upper jaw, bones around the eye sockets, the upper teeth, the lower teeth, as well as the anterior portions of the tongue.
Dr. Rodriguez, he suffered a gunshot accident back in 1997. Amazingly, his sight wasn't affected. He still had his vision, but as you say, he can now smell something he probably hasn't been able to do, for 15 years. He's now talking. Tell us about the moment that he was able to do these things.
So the face from the donor body stitched to the skull of the recipient becomes a kind of third face resembling neither. And here, David Hansen's Diego robot, 32 micromotors embedded in the soft skin, producing an array of facial expressions, real-time lip syncing. And so this robotic face can generate appropriate responses from people. You know, a lot of our behaviour is socially conditioned. You know, if I smile at you, you're likely to smile back at me. There is this social neuronal thing happening. So why I show this is that there are two quotes from Nietzsche and Wittgenstein that enable us to better understand relationships with future humanoid robots. Nietzsche points out that there's no being behind the doing. In other words, the doer or the agency is something attributed retroactively. And Wittgenstein, who asserts that thinking is not simplistically located inside your head, thinking happens with the lips that you speak, with the hands that you type or write. In other words, if humanoid robots, and humanoid robots now are becoming increasingly dexterous, increasingly mobile, and increasingly able to make facial expressions and gestures, we can have competence without consciousness. And this is a Daniel Dennett quote, in fact. And at the moment, there are two kind of directions with robotics in universities research. One is developing robots that are becoming increasingly more and more human-like. And on the other hand, we are making bodies more and more prosthetically augmented. So we can imagine a point in the future where there'll be little distinction and it will be meaningless to say there's any difference between a humanoid robot and a prosthetically augmented human. The partial head was a bio project where we scanned my face, we scanned a hominid skull. We did a digital transplant of this face over the hominid skull. Then using that data, 3D printed a biopolymer scaffold and then grew a layer of living skin over this scaffold. It only lasted days before it got contaminated, and then we had to preserve it in formaldehyde for the 3-month exhibition. But here, the partial head is a partial portrait of the artist, partially living for a few days. So it was kind of a post-hominid, but pre-human kind of facial construct. The extra ear was first imaged as an ear on the side of my head, but after 10 years of trying, I couldn't find any surgical assistance to realise it in this way. But finally, 3 plastic surgeons were found to construct an ear on my arm. So the scaffold is a biopolymer. Once it's inserted beneath the skin, and the skin is suctioned over the scaffold, over a period of 6 months, you have what you would describe as tissue ingrowth and vascularization occurring. So the ear becomes a living part of your body. It grows its own blood supply. I don't know how the light is here. If you can make it out, you can have a closer look afterwards if you like. But the ear on my arm is now a living part of my body. But the idea was not simply to replicate an ear on my arm. The idea, again, which has not been realised up until now, was to internet enable the ear, to electronically augment it, so this becomes a remote listening device for people in other places. The idea was you log into my ear and you listen to whoever is speaking, wherever I am. Here we did insert a small microphone in my ear, and even though my ear was wrapped in bandage with a partial plaster cast, even though the surgeon had a face mask on, he could speak to the ear. His voice was picked up and wirelessly transmitted. So the idea is plausible, but biomedical and technical reasons and scaling of the technology, this hasn't been realised yet. Some other art projects resulted from this project. This is a 4-metre-long sculpture of the ear on my arm. I did a performance lying on the sculpture. My body was covered with white slip. So this was the performance. Nothing else happened. The only thing that happened is the clay began to crack. It was a very cold day. My body's very warm. The clay begins to crack, transforming the body into some archaic looking construct. But whilst I was lying on this sculpture, I thought it might be interesting one more time, instead of just simply lying on the sculpture, perhaps being suspended above the sculpture. So a body with an ear on its arm would be suspended above the sculpture. Here 18 hooks are inserted into the back, the legs, and when everything was ready, when the rigging was done with cabling, the body was hoisted up. Make sure that everything's been removed. Go, Cameron, go. Go. So I knew from previous performances that when the cable takes the full weight of the body, because the cable is braided, it begins to untwist and the body just naturally begins to spin. I thought it would spin for about 5 minutes. The spinning continued for about 20 minutes. So this performance began when the body was hoisted off the sculpture, and the performance ended when the body was lowered down. So this performance was a kind of counterpoint between a whole physical body above a much larger sculpture of the ear on the arm. In the propel performance, the body's trajectory, position, orientation and velocity could be precisely programmed. I'll play the sound, it's important. And when that performance ended, a large sculpture of the artist's ear replaced the body, and the same choreography was performed. Exactly the same choreography was performed. What's interesting is that the robot that was choreographing the movements of the body was the same robot that carved the ear. So the body here becomes this kind of extended operational system of bodily metabolism, machine musculature and computational programming. The exoskeleton arm was developed for the rewired remix performance. This was a 5-day, 6 hours every day continuously, where I could only see with the eyes of someone in London. I could only hear with the ears of someone in New York, but anyone anywhere could access my right arm via the exoskeleton and remotely actuate it. So it was a kind of distributing of agency and a sharing of visual and acoustical senses. So the body effectively was kind of in 3 places at once. 2 virtually in New York and London, 1 physically in Perth. And the performance I'll show, though, is only 4 days, 5 hours a day continuously, with live streaming in Europe. Can we have the sound louder? So I didn't know what I was going to hear, I didn't know what I was going to see, and I didn't know when someone would make me lose my balance by lifting my arm.
Speak, I know just what you say.
Ganz viele verschiedene Sachen, die ich cool finde.
So this was sort of very strange watching these people dancing in the street, but as I said, I only gave general instructions for what these people were doing in these different cities. And sometimes there was a lot of boring moments, but sometimes some very interesting. When we connected New York and London, when I was in the Tate Modern, visually it was a very interesting experience, right? And when I was in a Chinese restaurant in New York, it was interesting when my friend was ordering Chinese food in my left ear and his partner was talking to me in my right ear, and I could hear Chinese voices. And so your perception, your awareness shifted from visual to acoustical. And then, as I said, if someone activated my arm, it would lose my balance and I would have to rebalance, and all of a sudden I would experience the physical situation. So here, the body has become this contemporary chimera of meat, metal and code, which performs beyond the boundaries of its skin and beyond the local space that it inhabits. Reclining stickman was a 9 metre long, 4 metre high, continuously rotating stick figure sculpture, actuated by pneumatic rubber muscles, 9 degrees of freedom altogether. There was audience interaction both locally and remotely. So anyone on the web could click the virtual switches and actuate the robot. This was the only installation that was active during the time the gallery was closed because of the pandemic. So the performance was for 5 hours continuously, and effectively the artist could actuate the limbs of the robot with the pneumatic joysticks, but the artist was interacting with anyone else from somewhere else, activating the robot as well. So you have to imagine that the muscles are inflating and contracting, exhausting and extending. And when I imagined this installation and performance, I imagined it as a kind of contemporary pietà. You know, a large robot clutching a small human, right? But Nina Sellers astutely observed that here the body is merely a human strap-on for the robot. And the stickman exoskeleton, I don't have time to show a video of this, but effectively it's a 5 degree of freedom algorithmically actuated exoskeleton. So for 5 hours continuously, I'm actuated by the exoskeleton and the computational generative programming. But we did develop a simple physical interface. So people who visited the gallery could insert their own choreography by bending the limbs of the mini stickman, pressing play, and their simple choreography could be inserted into the performance. This performance was one in Korea last year, and it was a performance that the body becomes the interactive switcher and mixer. We could project on all 4 walls. and body signals, signals from two sensor bracelets. Let me play it. Can we have the sound louder? So, for example, when the artist lifted his arm, he could capture the camera on the robot arm, and then by tilting his head or rotating his head, he could generate the dynamic video feedback that occurred. So, at a time when the individual body can be threatened existentially by fatally being infected by biological viruses, what becomes apparent now is that the human species is confronted by the more pervasive, invasive ontological risk of infection by its digital entities and viral algorithms, and this is a good thing. And to finish off, I used this example in 2011. The first twin turbine heart, artificial heart, was inserted into the chest of a terminally ill patient. He lived long enough to fully test this twin turbine heart, which was smaller and more robust and efficient. But what's interesting is that it circulates the blood continuously without pulsing. So in the near future, you might rest your head on your loved one's chest. They're warm to the touch, they're breathing, they're sighing, they're speaking, they have no heartbeat. And so what's happening here? The dead, the brain dead, the partially living, the yet to be born, the cryogenically preserved, the prosthetically augmented, the plastinated, synthetic life and artificial life all now share a material and proximal existence. The body individually achieves planetary escape velocity, but the human can no longer achieve escape velocity from the machinic and digital realm. So what it means to be human is perhaps not to remain human at all. And what artists do best, I think, is that they can generate contingent and contestable futures. In other words, possibilities that can be performed, that can be personally experienced, that can be evaluated, interrogated, possibly appropriated, most likely discarded. And we have to remember that a future is not a future if it is not of the unexpected. So speculating about the far future is counterproductive. Thank you very much.